Hello everyone, Thomas Weimbs here from Santa Barbara Nutrients. I'm traveling in Europe right now and just finished the Keto Live Conference in Switzerland, which was awesome. And I had a chance there to talk with Dr. Ian Lake, who is a general practitioner in the UK. Ian is very special. He has type 1 diabetes himself and has figured out in the last few years how to properly treat it, and it is the opposite of how type 1 diabetes is usually treated. So Ian practices a low carbohydrate ketogenic lifestyle for type 1 diabetes, and as one would of course expect, if one knows about physiology, of course this works. So this is of course essentially the only way to go to treat people with type 1 diabetes, in my opinion. So let's see what Ian has to say. Unfortunately, some of the bits I had to cut out because the sound had cut out. So I will do later on another interview with Ian to talk about some of the controversial things we were discussing. All right, enjoy. I thought I'll ask Ian about his experience with how he treats people with type 1 diabetes, and he actually treats them very different from what most practitioners do. The common kind of standard way of recommendations for type 1 diabetes is eat whatever carbs you want, just use more insulin. That's not what somebody does who actually has type 1 diabetes and is a doctor and knows what they're doing. For anyone who has type 1 diabetes, a lot of the keywords you'll all be very familiar with, but the approach is like radically the opposite of what your doctor might tell you to do. So instead of eating carbohydrates, sugar, starches and so on, the recommendation would be, if you do a low carbohydrate ketogenic lifestyle, to just eat as little as possible of sugars and starches and carbohydrates in general, which also means you don't need as much insulin and everything becomes much easier to control, right? Things don't go up and down, especially the down can be a big problem. The hypoglycemic episodes are greatly eliminated.
The effect of that is to drastically reduce the amount of insulin you need, because insulin is often driven by the carbohydrates in the meal. And that provides excellent results. My HbA1c, which is measured from a long-term control, was around 70 millimoles per mole, which is about 8% in other measurements, and it plummeted to low 40s, high 30s for the last 8 years. So I think for me personally that's an excellent track record. And the other thing is that I don't get as many hypos. I get far fewer hypos, which is absolutely fantastic. And I don't need to do carbohydrate loading before I do exercise. So nearly all of my exercise is done in what you call a fasted state, and that is because even though I'm relatively thin, I still have 85,000 calories of fat in my body. Compare that to 2,000 calories of sugar equivalent storage, which is glycogen. So I don't need to fuel for energy. Because I'm on very low volumes of insulin, I have very low chance of getting a hypoglycemic attack. And because of all that, I can just go for a run knowing that I'm not going to have any major hypo events, and it's much easier to control.
So, all right, but what is the outcome? So obviously for you, Ian, it worked out great. What about your patients? Can they manage this? What has been your experience? Have you quantified some results as surveys and so on?
So I've done a survey on my website of 170 people now who have completed it, who are on a ketogenic lifestyle, obviously, because they're interested in my website. And I've got some interesting results from that. Unfortunately, it's still the case that 50% of my colleagues are actively against recommending a ketogenic lifestyle in type 1 diabetes. And when people are actively against something, that would suggest they're actually knowledgeable about the condition. And when I drilled down into that, I took a subset of those people, and I got a subset of 20 people who were able to tell me what they felt were the reasons why people didn't want you to go onto a ketogenic lifestyle. And that was very interesting. So Around 25% of people thought that the diet was a fad and unsustainable. But when I did my survey, 96% of people on the survey felt that this diet was completely sustainable. And about half of them had been on it for over 3 years. So it was a sustainable lifestyle. About 15% of clinicians felt that carbohydrates were an essential macronutrient. Well, it isn't an essential macronutrient, and you do not need carbohydrates to eat carbohydrates for energy. Right. Your body will make carbohydrates for the energy that it needs to provide the critical tissues. Some neurological brain tissues and also the red blood cells are obligate users of sugar, but you do not need to eat that sugar in order to provide it.
Where can people find the information? Are there, do you have survey results on a website, social media? Where can people look this up and see, who's this guy, Ian Lake? What's he telling us? I want to read it.